now. Okay. Welcome everyone. I'm just going to reopen the chat just in case I need it. If anyone needs to let me know they're coming, going, things are not working. Welcome to week 2. I'm just going to pause for a minute just to acknowledge country and acknowledge that I'm sitting on Darug land out in Western Sydney. I'm always kind of reminded every time I come or go from my house because I pass up an arterial road through my area called Boundary Road. And it's always sobering whenever I'm driving on it because it's a reminder that it was literally at one point a boundary that separated where First Nations people could go and where they couldn't. So I kind of always take a minute when I'm driving up or down that road to acknowledge that this land was not ceded and taken by force, and to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Um, let's do a little bit of a recap before I jump into. Just going to have a check on the content tonight. We should be okay tonight in terms of trigger warnings, I think. Just for a little bit of a agenda is the word I'm looking for. We're going to talk a little bit about trauma responses tonight. Included in that are some neurological responses, some physical responses. Sometimes when we cover this content, students can recognize some of those symptoms in themselves. So just a bit of a reminder to check in on yourself and look after yourself as we go tonight. There is also a short discussion on sexual assault or sexual violence as we move towards maybe halfway through. So just a heads up that that's in the content tonight as well. So a little bit of a recap from last week. We spoke about the different types of trauma just to really kind of set the scene of where we were at, noting as well that people experience multiple different types of these traumas at multiple times throughout their lifespan. We also spoke about the impact that trauma has at various points in the lifespan, and that it depends on a few things what the impact of that is on us. So, how the person's traveling generally at that time, how their health might be. I know myself that when I'm feeling a little bit under the weather or I've got a cold or something, my bucket is already kind of half empty. Doesn't seem to take much to have a toll on me during those periods. So a good reminder, I suppose, that when there are other things going on and people's health is not 100%, that it can be a moment where things get to us more than they should, or things are a little bit more sensitive than they might be at other given times. Also, one of the other points we spoke about was that who people have around them and what their support network looks like, both informal and formal, can have an impact on how trauma symptoms manifest with us. I think too, we can acknowledge age, how old people are at any given time when the traumatic incident happens, taking into account that developmental side, what level of maturity or capacity they're at that time. People's overall resilience can have a bit of a lens on it. What else has been happening? I think naturally when people who are experiencing multiple stresses or have been through, something serious, a serious health concern or stressful life event, will have less tolerance for additional stress in general. So this concept of tolerance, and what we call distress tolerance is something we'll chat about tonight, but is also something we'll come back to throughout the subject, in terms of people's tolerance levels for certain levels of distress and how we can have an impact on that as practitioners as well. Cool. There were some really good examples this week on the Moodle of trauma responses. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about where these responses might come from, but I'm just going to throw it to you guys in case you haven't had a chance to have a look at the Moodle yet. What kind of trauma responses can you think of as a little brainstorm? And I'll I'll watch the chat in case people don't want to come on mic. What do you think? Got any ideas? Yep. Cognitive, behavioral, vicarious, good. Anyone else got examples of trauma, emotional and psychological? Yep. So types of trauma, yep. I'll keep watching in case anybody else has got some ideas. I like my thinking gorilla.
Irritable and angry outbursts.
Yeah. Yep.
Sorry,
Absolutely. That's okay. We like fur friends making cameo appearances. Yep. Physical. Yeah, good. Keep those in mind as we go. And we're going to have a little bit of a talk tonight about kind of where these responses come from and what they look like. Okay. So, a few key systems involved in how we respond to trauma. Your brain is obviously fairly critical to this process. Your brain has to see and interpret and process what's happening for you. If your brain doesn't make sense of what's happening, then the sensation and the perception don't happen. But knowing that trauma begins when an event or an experience overwhelms our normal coping mechanisms means it's helpful to understand what's happening internally for us at that point. So when we feel like our coping mechanisms have just broken down and everything's getting a bit on top of us, what's actually happening internally? The key point in this to remember is that an individual's normal coping responses provide them with a sense of control, connection, meaning, and safety. When we lose that coping response, we lose a sense of control, we lose a sense of connection, we lose a sense of meaning, and we lose our safety. So when we look at the neurobiology of trauma, this is teaching us that the body's response to trauma is a natural response to protect ourselves. And the key systems that are involved in that are the brain and the nervous system. So let's have a little bit of a look at the brain first. So this is an outline of some of the key parts of your brain that are involved in a trauma response. So what trauma does, this section of the brain is called the limbic system, so the feeling system. And trauma creates disruption in this limbic system. This is the part of your brain that stores the emotional response to your experience. So the happiness or the sadness, the distress, the frustration, the embarrassment. This is the section of your brain that holds all of that emotional response. So if we look down the bottom, the little light green kind of almond shape is the amygdala. The amygdala is like your fear center of your brain. So your trauma response and its memory is stored here in the amygdala. And this is the reason that individuals will often have a lot of emotions when they're remembering a traumatic experience, because this part of the brain is responsible not just for the response, but also the memory side of it. So it's a little almond shape part of your brain. It's buried in quite deep. So the really cool thing about your body is all of the important bits are quite deep down and are covered by layers of other things that worst case scenario could be sacrificed whilst maintaining, the important parts like your heart and your lungs and things. And the amygdala is like that. It's buried deep inside your brain, and it operates like a little bit of an emergency center. So it receives the first information from all of your senses that something's not quite right. And it doesn't take long to activate your body's emergency response. Hi, Maureen.
Hello everyone. Sorry.
Hello, you're all right. So it activates your body's emergency response, right? So this is kind of like the first responder center, right? So the 000, this is where it all sort of starts. So if you confront an oncoming car, for example, your eyes and your ears, or both, will send the information to your amygdala, and it will also contribute to an emotional response. It'll interpret the images that it's seeing or the sounds that it's hearing, and it will immediately send a distress signal to your hypothalamus there, which is a little light blue part. That's like the command center, right? This little hypothalamus fellow communicates with the rest of the body through your nervous system. And what his job is to do is to decide very, very quickly, am I fighting, flighting, freezing? What's my response going to be? This response is almost instantaneous. There's no thinking about it. This is your primal, part of your brain that is designed simply to keep you alive. So it happens very, very quickly with minimal thought going on. Once your hypothalamus sends it out to your nervous system, this part of the brain communicates with the rest of your body, right? So it goes through all of your nerves to all of your key parts of your body, particularly through your autonomic nervous system. So think of that as the auto part, right? It just happens. It's responsible for all of your involuntary body functions. So all the stuff you don't have to think about, it just happens in the background. Your breathing, your heartbeat, your blood pressure, the dilation of your blood vessels, and the other important part is the dilation of your blood vessels in your lungs, so the small airways in your lungs. And this autonomic nervous system has two parts. So it's got this sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. You can think of these two parts of the body as functions in a car. So the sympathetic nervous system is your accelerator. Here's your gas pedal, right? So he's triggering this fight or flight response that is providing your body with a burst of energy so that it can respond to this car that's coming directly at you. The parasympathetic nervous system is your brake. So its job is to rest and digest, right? It's calming the body down after you've stepped back off the curb, the car's gone past, and you're no longer in danger of getting squashed like a pancake anymore. So after the amygdala sends out that distress signal, so your amygdala has acted on this before you even know it, right? It's caught a flash of that car in your peripheral vision, or you've heard something as you're about to step onto the curb, and before you even know it, the hypothalamus is like, warning, warning, we are going to get hit by a car. And this happens really quickly. It sends all of this distress through to this autonomic nervous system, and without even realizing it, your heart starts racing, your breath starts getting faster and shallower because those blood vessels in your lungs are starting to expand and constrict. Without realizing it, your pupils will expand to let more light in so that you can see more things. Your digestion has completely stopped because nobody needs to digest food if you're about to get hit by a car. You get lots of blood rushing to all of your muscles, which can help you run really quickly if you need to run. But also what that's doing is redirecting away from your brain. So it's really hard to stand there and have a rational conversation with somebody when that stuff's happening. And you've got a whole bunch of hormones running through your body that results in all of this adrenaline and epinephrine, which makes you a bit jittery. So similar to if you've ever walked into your lounge room and there's been a big, great, hairy huntsman spider or something on the wall, and before you're realizing it, your heart's racing and you're shaky and you're sweaty, this is this sympathetic nervous system happening. So it sends all of these signals through your nerves to your adrenal glands, which responds by pumping out adrenaline into your bloodstream. And also epinephrine, which brings on a whole bunch of these physiological changes. So that's what's actually responsible for your heart racing and your other vital organs getting a whole bunch of blood flow. Your pulse rate is going up. Your breathing in response starts getting more rapid. So that's what's responsible for all of that. This is also, if you think about when you've had a bit of a panic reaction to something, most people will tell you, calm your breath down, just slow down, because what we're really trying to do is activate the parasympathetic nervous system. We're trying to slam the brakes on. We're trying to get our brain to start thinking and processing a little bit clearer what's actually happening. The car's, it's fine, it's stopped or it's gone past, you're not in danger anymore. Whilst you're in this little green zone and the stress response is happening, you will notice if you've ever sort of sat in this space, if you think about something sort of low key that's happened to put you in this, maybe you've, thought you saw a snake, but it was really a sock. You'll notice your senses get sharper. So your hearing gets sharper, your vision gets sharper because of that dilation in your pupils. What it also does is epinephrine triggers the release of glucose or blood sugar from temporary storage sites in your body. And that floods into the bloodstream because its whole idea is your body needs to find as much energy as it possibly can to run away from this car that's heading at you and going to hit you. And all of that happens so quickly that you don't know that it's happening, right? The wiring is so efficient that the amygdala and the hypothalamus start that response before your brain's visual center has even got a chance to fully process what's happening. That's why you see people sometimes jump out of the path of a car before they even think about what they're doing, or we change track if we're going to step on something that's going to bite us. It all just happens kind of without realizing it. Once that initial surge of epinephrine kind of dies down a little bit, the hypothalamus activates the second component, because it's not actually possible, as we all know, to live on that adrenaline response for very long. It's got an end date. And so what happens is once that adrenaline starts wearing off, the second component of that stress response system is called the HPA axis. That's the hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and your adrenal gland. These are all your hormones that start working. And what they do, this HPA axis relies on these signals to keep that gas pedal pressed down. So if the brain continues to see something as dangerous, the hypothalamus continues to release hormones that travel into your pituitary gland and into your adrenal gland from there, which releases cortisol. Has anyone heard of cortisol? We're familiar with that. Yep, the stress hormone. So what that does, cortisol, is it keeps your body revved up and on high alert, right? And when the threat passes, typically the cortisol will start to wear off, and this purple section, this parasympathetic nervous system, starts to dampen the stress response. This is in an ideal world. So this is if we have literally come face to face with a bear, we've realized, shit, I'm going to get my face bitten off. The body has responded, the bear's run away, and now we're safe again. It doesn't necessarily happen if we're working in a really stressful job and we finish one piece of work and then the next one comes in. And then while we've been working on that one, there's 19 other jobs over there that need me to work on, and there's people calling me, and I've got 75 emails in my inbox. And that's when the cortisol starts keeping to run, right? We don't get to this purple bit where everything starts slowing down and the body goes back to normal. So it's this green section here that we're trying to really stay away from staying in here too long. But this is when you're sitting opposite somebody and somebody has had a flashback, a memory, they've heard something, they've seen something, because all of those senses are linked to your amygdala's emotional response. This is what's happening, this sympathetic nervous system response. Where we need to try and take people is into this parasympathetic nervous response, because we can't, if you think about it, in that green section, your body is reacting as though the bear is right in front of you about to eat your face. People are not going to care about rationalizing, let's look at this and let's set some goals and let's, work through a priority list of tasks for you. You can't do that when you're in this green section. So this is why it's important for us to really sit and understand what's actually happening internally when someone's having that sympathetic nervous system response, because it helps us understand what they're capable and not capable of doing in that space. If we have a look, so you'll hear a lot throughout this unit, and particularly in your reading in trauma and things, about this fight flight response. This combination of responses, so this green purple combination is also known as fight flight because it evolved as a survival mechanism. It's enabled people and animals to react very, very quickly to life-threatening situations. You can imagine as a species where we would have come if it took our brain, 5 minutes to go, oh, I think that brown shape over there that's lunging at me could be a bear. Let me just stop and have a think about what I know about bears and whether bears are native to this little spot. You'd be dead before you could even put all of that stuff together, right? So your brain doesn't wait for you to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. It sees something that it determines as being scary, and it hits the gas straight away. The difficulty in this is it can also overreact to something that's not necessarily life-threatening, particularly if you are a person who lives in that green area a lot. So if you have lots of stress going on, if you've got a really stressful job, if you've got stuff going on in your personal life that's, filling up your bucket and pushing your level of distress tolerance, as we call it, if you've got family difficulties, then, trying to make it to work on a day where the Sydney train system's shut down and there's no trains going and everyone's in a bad mood, doesn't take much to push you into that kind of green space and have all of that stress reaction happen again. And then we see this fight, flight, freeze, fawn start coming out, this response in the body. A fight response means your system is physically prepared to fight a physical or an emotional threat. So your body is working in a way that leaves you kind of buzzing with energy, because that's what it's doing, right? It's sending all of its resources into standing up against, the bear that's coming at you. So it's creating a whole bunch of blood flow so that your muscles are as fast and as strong as they're ever going to be. It's opening up your pupils so that you've got as much light as you possibly need. It's speeding up your heart rate so that you can move quickly. It really is physically preparing you to stand up and have the fight of your life. What that looks like in reality, if you are not in a forest facing a bear, is really high energy. It's hyper arousal. It's quick to temper. Not always angry, aggressive, but just very high energy, very, in the people that take up the space without kind of meaning to. It can be agitation. So those physical kind of signs where people are, tapping pens against the desk in a meeting or fidgeting or tapping their leg constantly. The adrenaline and all that kind of stuff that is happening physically internally that's preparing you for a fight, it's got to go somewhere. The energy's got to dissipate somehow. And so that's how it kind of manifests, is hyper vigilance, hyper arousal. If we look at flight is very similar because your body has prepared you to run away. So again, all the oxygen in your lungs and all that blood in your muscles preparing you to run as quickly as you possibly can. That's why when you finish this response and you go into the kitchen and Mr. Hairy Legs on the window is no longer there and he's no longer a threat, you kind of feel a bit exhausted. Your muscles get really heavy and you get tired after you've had that adrenaline response. Has anyone experienced that when someone jumps out and boo, and you have that, oh my God. And then 5 seconds later, you kind of get this heavy feeling over your muscles once everything's, it's all that adrenaline looking for somewhere to go. It's a similar response in flight, but what that looks like is also possibly anxiety and panic responses, because if your brain is preparing you to run away and you can't, that is a second layer of panic. So if, for example, you are in a lift and something has, triggered that response in you, and what the brain is actually screeching at you to do is get away from the threat. If you can't get away, your brain is forced to switch from flight to fight. And so you might start feeling some of those agitation and stress responses as well. If we look at a freeze response, so if we think of, I think next week I show you my little map, but there is a model of distress tolerance that looks like a little boat. So there's 3 sections in it. There's a little boat in the middle, and the center is our kind of calm space. This is where we're doing all right. We've got a nice little window where everything's traveling fine. If we think of fight and flight as being up, so up, hyper vigilant, hyper aroused, all our energy levels are up, then the freeze and the fawn response are down. So they're in that bottom part. A freeze response happens in your brain when it determines very quickly it can't defeat this very frightening, dangerous threat, and it can't run away either. So what it does is it physically, mentally, emotionally immobilizes us. If you think of a bunny rabbit hopping out in a field somewhere, rabbits have an excellent freeze response. Actually, what they'll do is if a rabbit is turned upside down or if its head goes below its bottom, it dissociates. Its eyes roll back in its head and it actually physically dissociates. It's very similar to what a human will do. If the threat is terrifying, it will immobilize us. If we are aware that we are then immobilized, that adds an extra layer of stress and terror to that situation. This is where we see sometimes dissociation in humans, which is completely blocking out what's happening. I can't fight. I can't fight. I can't run away. I'm going to freeze, but what's happening to me is so overwhelming that my body is going to protect me by doing the only thing it can, and it's completely dissociating and shutting down. It's a very common reaction to sexual assault. It's a very common reaction to very invasive threats and trauma. You also see this sometimes in situations where something's happening to somebody else that's extraordinarily confronting and the brain can't make sense of it. So perhaps if you have witnessed something fairly catastrophic, somebody dying, someone stuck in a car accident, something like that, that's very, very difficult for the brain to process. Also, something that happens is that dissociation freeze response. The fawn response is a new addition to this research. It's very common in domestic violence frameworks. It talks about behavior that is designed to appease the threat. And in the context, I guess, of domestic violence, it speaks to behavior around people that are trying to seek safety by meeting the wishes and the needs and demands of others. So what they will often do is act in a way that placates the other person, that calms the situation down, even if it's something that's in contrast to their own values or their own feelings. I don't know if any of you are MAFS watchers. It's like a train wreck that I can't stop watching because unfortunately it gives me lots of things to talk about in my workshops. If anyone was watching it, you would have seen the fawn response in the girl from New Zealand, Jackie, when they were all sitting around the dinner table and everyone was having a go at her and she just discovered that her partner had said something fairly brutal about her eyes, her physical appearance. That's fawn behavior. I'm going to laugh it off. I'm going to agree with him. I'm going to go with the moment because what's happening is I can't fight. I can't run away. I can't freeze. I'm just going to people please until I can get myself out of this situation. Again, a subconscious response. So this is people who kind of unconsciously think that going into a relationship with somebody else, because it's very it happens in the context of relational trauma. So the price of admission to that relationship really is forfeiting all their own preferences and needs and boundaries and rights, right? So it becomes all about the other person and keeping them happy. In real life, what this can look like is choosing a certain career to please your parents, It could be not speaking up about your preference of a restaurant when you choose to go out for dinner because you know that that might potentially cause a fight. It could be missing work so that you can look after your partner's needs if there's some codependency or unhelpful dynamics there. It can be giving compliments to somebody who's abusing you behind the scenes because this is how we people please, right? We're appeasing the threat the best way we can. So that's our 4 trauma responses. What I also wanted to mention tonight is this hormonal response. There's a number of hormones involved in the body stress response, and you don't need to know all of this stuff off the top of your head, and I'll make it obvious at the end why I tell you about this. Adrenaline, I mean, we all know what adrenaline is. We've all had an adrenaline rush riding on a roller coaster. It makes our heart beat faster. It allows our body to stand and fight something if it needs to, or to get enough oxygen to allow us to run faster if we need to get away. That's the one that everyone kind of knows, the adrenaline response. Similarly, cortisol, it's the stress response. Everyone kind of knows, or it's very commonly known that cortisol increases the amount of energy your body has to fight the threat. It's also what causes you to get overweight if you are constantly stressed out because your body's constantly in this fight or flight mode. It's not resting, it's not digesting, it's not processing all of your toxins and things in your body that need to happen to keep you healthy. It's just pumping you with cortisol to get through the next, drama at work, the next email, the next phone call. So they're the ones that are kind of commonly known. These two on the right are important, and you don't need to remember them, but just remember, I guess, what they do. They're the 2 O's. So you got opioids are your body's natural painkiller. Opioids are your body's Band-Aid. It's what happens if you hurt yourself. So if you, I don't know, fall over and break your arm, sometimes you have a bit of a giggle or an inappropriate laugh if you fall over or something, not just because of embarrassment, but it's your body's response to a pain, a hurt, a physical hurt. It also comes out during labor. It comes out during very intense traumatic stress, including sexual assault. And if you think of what a Band-Aid is designed to do, it's designed to block out the pain response. So it is your body's natural painkiller. So it's released in a physical injury and also ties into a freeze response as well. Oxytocin is your body's natural feel-good hormone. It also comes out during birth, otherwise we'd probably all die or never do it again. It comes out during orgasm. It comes out during periods of connection with people that we really like. It comes out when you stare into your lovely dog or cat's eyes. It's a bonding hormone. Because it's linked so closely to relation, to connection with other people, it can activate to help you feel better. So we've had the natural painkiller in the opiates, and now it's time for the Band-Aid in the oxytocin. The problem with these systems is that they also contribute to other systems we don't need shutting down. So your body is smart enough to realize that if you're going toe-to-toe with a tiger in the jungle, it doesn't need the digestive system. We're not planning on eating if we're dead, right? So that part shuts down for a little while, which is wonderful if you're having a quick fight with a tiger in the jungle. But if you're going into a really stressful Zoom meeting that runs overtime, and now we have to go pick up the kids and we're late for school pickup, and then we forgot to get dinner and now there's nothing to eat, this constant stress stuff keeps telling our digestive system, we don't need you at the moment. We're dealing with this crisis over here. So it plays havoc on our body, right? We don't sleep because we're wired. When we don't sleep, we're tired. We make bad decisions. We do silly things. We, run through red lights and stuff. We have accidents because we're not concentrating properly. Our sleep systems become really dysregulated. We get high blood pressure. We get, artery clogging deposits that contribute to things like feeling depressed and having anxiety. We wind up with struggles with weight and health because, you know, we're either eating more to get through the day, we're decreasing our sleep and our exercise because we're constantly trying to do things. It has all of that response. What these two O's also do is play havoc with your memory. So if we think about pulling a woman aside who's coming to the police station and wants to make a report about sexual violence that happened an hour ago, her body is still flooded with opiates and oxytocin. So what we could see is someone sitting there giggling maniacally as she tells us what happened to her. And what's the police response? This can't be real. She's laughing. She doesn't look very upset, doesn't look distressed. Could be smiling inappropriately, could be a tone of voice. You know, what happens when we have oxytocin and stuff, it's a feel good. It might also, if we're overrun with opiates, might blunt the response, might be completely flat, right? And that's when it's like, oh, well, there's no reaction at all. She's talking in a monotone. She doesn't seem very distressed. She's not crying. Plays into all these stereotypes about how we should respond when a trauma has happened. The thing about opiates and oxytocin is they can last for a really long time. So if you are interviewed about a crime, if something has happened and your body is flooded with oxytocin, that can last for 24, 48 hours. Opiates, similarly, for a couple of days. So if you go in to make your statement 3 or 4 days later and you are flat as a tack because your body is overrun with opiates, your body has tried very, very hard to keep you alive by blunting your emotional response. But both of those come across like you don't really care. It's either a giggling, you know, inappropriate down one level or inappropriate down the other level, as far as some people are concerned that don't understand this trauma response. And imagine how distressing it is if something has happened to yourself and you don't understand why you're laughing, or you can't understand why you're flat, and maybe you want to cry, you want to be angry, and you can't. You're not having that response. This is why this stuff is really helpful to help explain to people what's happening internally for them. It's not well known by police. It's not on any type of fact sheet from New South Wales Health that you can hand to somebody and say, here, this is why this is going on. So it's important that we understand that, we carry that through into our learning. Last little mention on brain. We do come back to this stuff in the later weeks, but I just kind of want to set the scene with brain for now. I don't want to overwhelm you with too many terms. This is the other interesting and important part of the brain, the hippocampus. Here's your memory center. So when the amygdala is activated, when your little first responder is going off, whoop, 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 there's an alarm, he turns the hippocampus partially off. So the hippocampus is involved with your memory recall, particularly long-term memory. This means that when somebody is sitting in that green zone, when that trauma response is happening, or you are trying to recall a memory of a traumatic event, you might not be able to get the details right. Your recall might not be chronological. It might not be linear, which they call fragmented memory. And fragmented memory is a perfectly natural way of processing natural events, particularly people that have a freeze response to a traumatic incident. The body's way of protecting you from what's happening is literally blocking it out. So there are going to be periods during that chronology that you're trying to give somebody that are just black, that you just don't know what's happened, or you get the details a bit fuzzy, or you get them in the wrong order, because your body has literally protected you by turning it off. For this reason, it's very difficult for survivors of trauma to give a nice linear explanation of what's happened with a lovely, clear start and end point. This is not problematic if that person is able to process that in their own time. There's no pressure. It's not a situation that requires a nice linear narrative. It's very problematic if they're being asked to provide a statement where they need to keep going back and adding detail as it comes to them. when details get a little bit confused, when we suddenly sit back and say, I can't actually remember if A came before D, and now I'm thinking about it, it's getting all like more jumbled. You can see how that's going to come across in a police statement or a statement about something. So this little hippocampus guy plays a really important part in your memory, and it's an important part of the brain to remember when we are thinking about how trauma has an impact on certain parts of our brain and our memory. Is that sitting okay with people? Are you feeling like I've just thrown a brain dictionary at you, or is it kind of making a bit of sense? Yep, no, kinda, sorta. Okay. We come back to it, I promise. By the end of the semester, you'll get it. Now, I just want to talk briefly about ACEs before we finish up. Who's familiar with ACEs? Who's heard of ACEs? Maybe some people? No? Okay. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. They are stressful, often very traumatic events that happen in childhood, and has been shown through this ACEs research to have an impact on someone's health later in life. It was a study done by the CDC and Kaiser in America. There were I think the initial research had 11 ACEs that were things like parental separation, parent going to jail, alcohol and drug use by a parent, mental health. So things that had a very adverse impact on that child's development. In some organizations and systems, an ACEs scoring tool is used to indicate the impact of someone's childhood experiences on their health. How the initial research was set up is that investigators were very interested to know what impact did this stuff have on people's coping mechanisms. So if you've experienced a parent who's got significant mental health, a parent who passed away from suicide, the other parent has been left to kind of grieve and pick up the family. As a result, your family was homeless and had to move several times, and your schooling was disrupted. You've got 5 or 6 ACEs there already. So the research suggested that 5 or 6 ACEs in this particular just scenario off the top of my head meant that your ability to cope was reduced and you were more vulnerable to adverse methods of coping. So it might be using drugs and alcohol. It might be, truanting from school. It might be things like running away from home. And so you've got partial homelessness in there. So the argument was there would be these adverse experiences that would lead you to negative or maladaptive ways of coping with it. And those maladaptive ways of coping would lead to poor health outcomes, which kind of sounds like common sense, right? If you're going to use drugs and alcohol to cope with something traumatic, then you're going to wind up with health implications from that drug and alcohol use. What they also wanted to determine then was what support or interventions we might need to give those people. So the ACEs scoring tool had 10 statements on it that were presented as adverse experiences during childhood. So types of verbal abuse, parental separation or divorce, parents subjected to domestic violence was another one, types of physical abuse, household substance use. And if someone had been subjected to one of those experiences, they scored a 1. And a score of 10 would indicate that that individual had been subjected to, more than one all of those ACEs. You added them all up. Higher meant that that person was at high risk of mental health and physical problems. So it was done in 1998. The research has significantly moved from there, but you will see this ACEs research pop up in lots of things. There was what's her name? Nadine Burke Harris, who was a pediatrician in America. She does a fantastic TED talk on this, where she talks about if somebody walks in, she's a GP. She says, if somebody walks into my office and in the course of getting their life history, they tell me that, dad unfortunately had a drug addiction, mum had really bad mental health, yada, 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 then she knows immediately this person is at higher risk of diabetes, higher risk of heart disease. I need to run these certain panels on their hormones and their thyroid functioning. It's a great concept. Where it goes wrong is that often that middle link is forgotten about. It's not the adverse childhood experience that leads to the poor health outcome. It's the coping strategies in the middle. So the danger here is that we work with people, we gather a history, particularly adolescents, young adults, and we say, oh, all these traumatic things have happened to you. You're more at risk of mental health and you're more at risk of, you're vulnerable to all these mental health diseases. But it's actually the coping stuff or the lack of coping, maladaptive coping, that leads to the health outcomes. This is important because we don't want to start labeling people's trauma as being, well, it's just a given that you're going to get mental health, particularly children. So remembering the whole kind of concept or the framework of this ACEs stuff in policy was to strengthen the coping mechanisms. The idea of all of this was to say, we don't want A to wind up as C, so we've got to hit B. We've got to strengthen people's household financial security so that if one parent passes away, if one parent's in hospital for something, if one parent's in jail, the household's financial security doesn't open them up to things like homelessness. We need to look at family-friendly work policies. We want to look at social norms that protect against violence happening, right? We want to look at men and boys as allies in prevention of domestic violence, or we want to involve them in programs that keep them out of jail so that we're not seeing, A turn into C, if that makes sense. So what we're looking at really when we're studying all of the ACEs research is how do we hit that section in the middle? How do we increase people's ability to cope with adversity and trauma? What we don't want to do, and what we sometimes see when we see people that have misinterpreted this ACEs research, is predicting the outcome of one person based on actions that other people took towards them. What we don't want to do is say to this young person who's 8, oh, well, because your mum and dad did this, and because your dad was homeless, and because your mum's mental health really went downhill, and, because you're struggling at school and you can't sleep and, you're dabbling in marijuana, we're going to see you go down the path of having poor mental health, and we're going to see you go down the path of getting locked up. And, we don't want to draw that bow because, as we know, labels and things tend to follow people around, particularly kids. So that's your homework this week. I want you to reflect on whether we really should be predicting the outcomes of a person, using ACEs scores. Do we need to score someone? Do we need to add up a thing and say, right, well, you've had all these shit things happen to you, so now we know that you're vulnerable to all these other things. Is that fair? The second question is this thinking, is this method of using ACEs trauma-informed? Is it strengths-based? Is predicting the negative outcome of a child as a result of their ACE score trauma-informed? No. Doesn't tell us that we are going to get, this person's going to have mental health, this person's going to wind up in juvie, this person's going to have teen pregnancy. Doesn't tell us all of that stuff. What it does when we start scoring people and using this ACE score in a negative way is it is disempowering. It takes away any possibility of growth and development and potential to a child who's already been subjected to trauma. So an ACEs test is not an assessment tool. We shouldn't use it as an assessment tool. What we should use it as is a prompt to say, let's unpack this kid's support. Let's unpack what's helping this kid get up and cope with what's going on around them. And how do we need to strengthen the systems of support that are around them? That's how we stop A turning into D. The there's a couple of things to remember. There's only 10 items on that ACEs questionnaire. It was developed in 1998. It misses so many other types of trauma. It misses refugee trauma, exposure to war, famine. Like, there's so much other stuff that this doesn't capture. It's very westernized. It captures, there's no cultural acknowledgement in there whatsoever. We can't score and predict outcomes of trauma. Everyone responds to trauma individually. You'll all use your own unique coping strategies, and they don't stay the same throughout the lifespan. How you cope with something at 15 is not how you'll cope with it at 45. So we've just got to be careful of tools and assessments and scores and labels and criteria that tends to get written down in a file and follow someone through their life unnecessarily. It doesn't tell you their story. It doesn't tell you the context. It doesn't tell you the timing and the pattern and the intensity of stress and distress. We can't say that this child's trauma is more substantial and significant because they have 4 ACEs compared to this child's trauma, which is only 1 ACE, but they are living in a country that's war-torn and they don't have a support network and there's no family left and there's no money and no house. We can't actually compare and say that one child is more vulnerable than the other. What we can do is aim all of our policy and procedures and mandates and best intentions at increasing those coping mechanisms so that people's resilience is built up. That conversation can be further explored in the book, What Happened to You? It's by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, if nobody's heard of it. There's some great podcasts. There's like an Audible version that's pretty awesome that Oprah narrates herself. And what it does is it tries to change the lens of what's wrong with you to what happened to you. So it's not about what is wrong internally with you, what's broken, what do I need to fix? What is this medication designed to do for you that's like, imbalanced or something internally? It looks at what happened to you and what an empowering and validating statement it can be to say, the of course rule. You'll hear me bang on about the of course rule all term. Of course you feel like that when this happened to you, right? Of course you can't sleep. All of this stuff is going on. Right? Of course you can't construct a sentence. Your body is in permanent fight or flight. Right? Of course you can't sit down and meditate and do all of these wonderful self-care strategies that you think you need to do because your body is wired from being under cortisol and adrenaline. So it's about understanding, the internal processes, what happened to you, what is happening to you and for you, rather than what's wrong with you. Okay. Lots of content tonight, lots of words and sort of things that tend to make people go away and have a think about, oh, that's what I do, or that's how I feel sometimes, or that must have been what was happening then. Please take some time to reset tonight, tomorrow morning. Don't go straight to bed, please, on top of all of that information, and reach out if any of it has brought up anything for any of you as we go. Happy to debrief with anyone tomorrow if you need one. Otherwise, I'll stay for any questions if anyone's got any questions. No, everyone looks brain fried. I'm sorry. Have I just killed everyone's brain for the night? Everyone's thinking. No. Okay. Don't forget, next week is a quiz. So start just mentally preparing some notes and things for that. Did you have a question, Maureen?
No.
No, just unmuted. Okay. I hope you're all okay
Yeah.
and that I haven't just bombarded your brains with information, but take care of yourselves, please, and reach out if you need to. I'm happy to call you tomorrow and have a chat if it's brought anything up for anyone. TAFE Counsellor is here as well. Otherwise, have a lovely week ahead, please, and enjoy the cooler weather if you're in Sydney. It's so nice to not have air conditioning blasting all night because it's hot and sweaty and gross. You're welcome, Beatrice.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Colin.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
And good night.
Good night.
Mm.